Alright everyone, so in this video I'm going to show you how to add the shading on your skull using the charcoal and the white chalk. So I didn't exactly have the exact same materials as you guys do in the classroom, so I tried to pick some of my supplies that's pretty similar or close to it. As you can see, there's different types of charcoal. You've got charcoal sticks, charcoal pencils. First thing you want you to do, what you should always do when you are trying to add value to an object, is finding your light source. So I'm going to do it from the top left hand corner over here. If it helps you, go ahead and draw your little sun and of course your sunbeams. And that'll actually help you out a lot determining where those highlights need to be. So I'm using my soft charcoal stick. Like I said, it's something that's as close to what you guys were using as I could get. I'm going to start off here on the inside of the eye. And you're just going to fill it in as best as you can. Remember, since it is charcoal, it is able to smudge, so you're going to want to have to smudge those empty gaps. Now, you're going to be having a better quality paper than I did. Mine is just the copy paper, so I don't have as much of a texture on my paper as you do. So for me to be smudging, it was a little more difficult on the copy paper because it doesn't have that texture for the charcoal to get pressed into. But as you can see, it's still doable. But remember, you do want to smudge. So after I did the eyes, I went ahead and I went in and I did the inside of the nose. Again, smudging it into those empty gaps, into those empty spots. And of course the smudging also helps keep your charcoal to make it last longer. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of a shadow here on the bottom jaw underneath that cheekbone. Now when we put the shadow here, it's supposed to give it the illusion that it's underneath the cheekbone. And so you want it to be darker towards the top, and it's going to fade into that lightness on the bottom. Then I went ahead and I added a little bit of a shadow on the inside of the jaw. Again, giving the illusion that the top portion of your mouth is above the bottom portion. You also want to keep in mind your light source there on the left hand side, so the majority of your left hand side should be lighter than the right hand side. And I went ahead and I added a little bit of shadow towards the bottom on the chin part, just so we can see that there is somewhat of a curve or an indentation on the chin right underneath those teeth. Then of course another thin small layer of charcoal here on the bottom. Remember, you always want to put just a thin layer of darkness towards the edge of your objects, especially if they're rounded, and this will give that illusion that it has that dimension. Now I'm going to come up here towards the top left hand side, right below or right by the cheekbone. And this part, majority of the shading, since it is in that light source highlight area, you don't want it to be too dark. This side on the right here, since it's on the opposite side of our light source, we want to go ahead and put it a little bit darker. And see, again, you can kind of see I had a little issue with the charcoal smudging on my copy paper, but I just kind of worked with it and smoothed it out. And then here's that dark line along the edge to make it look rounded, to give it that 3D effect. And I basically was just drawing on top of my marker line, so that way if I made a mistake and it wasn't able to smudge, then I could just use it and cover it up with that line. So now I'm going to kind of just brush my finger over the entire top of the skull just to give it that little bit of shade so that way it looks like the actual skull's texture. Now I'm going to come and put a little bit of darkness along this little crack here at the top. Now remember, when you're doing these little tiny bits of darkness, you want to kind of smudge your finger in the direction that you want that shadow to flow. So instead of rubbing across side to side, I'm kind of rubbing along the edge of that crack, pulling that charcoal to create a shadow. And then again, just rubbing once over again, making it nice and smooth, adding shadows where I think I need to. And if you make a mistake, you can erase it, don't worry. Or you can do what I did, where I kind of just kept working at it. Like I said, my texture of my paper is a lot different, so it was a little harder to get those smudges out. Now we're going to put some shadow here along the cheekbone. Now we want to give the illusion that the cheekbone is actually overlapping a little bit above that top portion where the teeth are. So if we put our shadow towards the bottom and kind of blend it out, it's going to look more rounded and it'll start to give form and shape and volume to your skull. So again, I had a little bit of an issue with that texture of the paper. And of course, what we do to the right side, we're going to go ahead and do again to the left side. So the same thing. Of course, the left side, we don't want to put as much shadow because it is in the light. Now we're going to go ahead and put some darkness here above those teeth. Now it doesn't have to be too much, doesn't have to be too dark. We just want to give that illusion that it's got that dimension to it, that volume. And again, I'm just going through and smudging over, making sure I don't have any charcoal like stick lines, that it's all nice and smooth. I'm just going to go in and add a couple more little shadows here around the eye, just adding in some more darkness and some more shadows where I think it would need it to help it make it look three-dimensional. Of course, if you don't want to do this part, you don't have to. Again, it's all based on what you want on your drawing. Going back in and just adding a little bit more darkness to it. Like I said, the texture on my paper was very difficult to get it to actually stay because I didn't have those grooves. I didn't have that texture to push it into. Whereas your class paper, your project paper, or the paper you have in your sketchbook or that you buy from the store, it's gonna have a lot more texture than a piece of white copy paper. So here I'm just going in and I'm adding a couple of little dark spots here along the top of the teeth that are on top. And I try to kind of stick to mostly the top half of those teeth. And since we are keeping in mind our light source, it's a little hard to tell in the video, but I tried to keep it towards the right hand side of each tooth, just so that way only that right hand side away from the light source gets darkened. Same thing here on the bottom teeth, except you're going to be doing it the bottom half. And again, just rubbing right over it, making sure I've got those real nice darknesses. Remember that if you have that good variety of super dark darks that transition into those super light lights, it's gonna really make your object or your drawing look very well done. It's going to look more realistic. Again, just going back over, adding some more darkness to some of the areas. smoothing things out. And what you essentially want to do is you want to try and make sure you don't have any charcoal stick marks. So if you can see little lines and not values, then you really want to go in there and you want to try and smudge them out. Again, because of the texture of my paper, it was very, very difficult. That's why I keep going over parts over and over again. Since you're going to have texture on your paper, it shouldn't be that difficult. Again, just adding those dark shadows where I think need be. Of course, if you don't like it with those really dark shadows, try to minimize how much darkness you put, but you do want to have a little bit slightness of those really, really dark shadows. Now I'm going in and I'm just adding a little bit of shadow on the top portion here. On our skulls, we actually have a little bit of a groove here around the eye socket of our eye. So I wanted to give that illusion that those eye sockets were actually pushed out a little bit and that the skull part on the top was farther back and rounded to the back. So now I'm going to go ahead and use my white pastel stick. This is the closest I could find. If your white chalk is really dirty, go ahead and just rub it off, scrape it to the side, and you can start. So I'm going to go in and I'm just going to start adding whites to where I think there should be highlights. Now remember, there are portions on our face, on our skull, that actually protrude and stick out farther. And so this nose rim, the rim of your nose, is actually one of those points. So I had started there only because it was the first part that I thought would be the farthest out. And then again over here on this cheekbone here. And you can already see like this little bits of white that I'm adding and blending with those grays that I have from my charcoal stick are actually creating this very smooth gray. And that's essentially what it should look like. You shouldn't really see too many marks and too many scratches of each one. You want those two to blend together. I'm putting some on the right hand side. Now of course, because the right hand side is not in the light as much as the left hand side, I'm not putting as much. I'm not putting as much pressure also. Now of course, the more pressure you put with your chalk, the more brighter it's going to be. And then of course, the more pressure you put with your charcoal, the darker it's going to be. And so you can already see how it's actually starting to form and show that dimension just by these little bits of highlights. Now I'm going up to the top of the skull, smoothing it out. I had actually didn't like the darkness that I put. I think I had made it a little bit too dark, so I'm using that white chalk pastel to kind of cover it up, smooth it out so it's not so dominant. And again on the right hand side here, of course not as much darkness or lightness because I do want it to be darker. And so this little transition here, I had actually, my phone ran out of space, so I actually had to restart my video. And as you can see, I kind of put some really bright white lines there along the edge of that crack so that way you could see that crack popping out. Now when you add the white to that crack, just make sure you choose one side of your line. If you decide to do the highlight on the left hand side of your line, then every single line that you've got, it should be on the left hand side of the lines. And then of course the shadow would be on the opposite side. And so again, I'm just going through here and adding more highlights, more whites, just to give you an idea of where you need to be putting those lights. Here on the bottom, on those jaw lines, the left hand side, you want it out to the left, and then of course the right hand side, you don't want it on the inside on the left because that's underneath the top of your jaw, your top portion of your mouth. You want it on the right hand side, just a tiny bit where it peeks out. And then of course I went in, I actually had a softer charcoal stick, that's meant for blending, and so I just put little bits of black with that charcoal stick just to add a little bit of a gray, little bit of a dimension into those teeth. And of course you do want to also put whites on those teeth, because my phone actually stopped recording while I was doing it. Make sure you put the white of the teeth on the left hand side where the sun and your light source are coming from, and then of course that dark shadow on the teeth on the right hand side, that's the opposite side of where the sun or the light source is coming from. And of course, just again going back in with my really soft charcoal stick and just adding in those super deep shadows. And don't worry, obviously our fingers are gonna get dirty, our hands are gonna get dirty, your paper just from touching it's gonna get dirty, and all that is fixable at the end, and I'll show you what to do at the end with that. So of course, just going back and forth, adding in those highlights, adding in those grays, those dark blacks, those shadows. It's all basically up to you. I mean, this is just more or less where shadows and highlights should be going. Just to give you an idea. And remember, if you were blending with one of your fingers for the charcoal, which is black, don't use the same finger when you're blending with your white. And so now we're just ready to erase. So very carefully you'll take your eraser and you're gonna go along the outside edge of your skull. Now I'm saying to do it very carefully because if that charcoal is very thick and it gets on the edge of your eraser, it is gonna start to draw like a piece of charcoal. So just very carefully go around the edge, take your time, turn your paper around, try not to cover up part of your drawing like I do, and start erasing on the opposite side, because then it's going to be a lot harder for you to see what to erase or where to erase. I had actually erased some of the part on the skull there on the left, but I just let it be. And of course, be careful when you do dust off those eraser pieces that you don't smudge your charcoal. And of course, last but not least, you want to erase the inside of the mouth here on the jaw, just to give it that extra pop. And that's it. So this is how you draw or add the values to a skull.